There is a version of this story where Gilberto Mora is just another name in a group stage highlight reel. A talented kid, a nice subplot, forgotten by the quarterfinals. That is not what happened. What happened instead is that a 17-year-old was subbed off with his country's biggest football match in nearly a century, still hanging in the balance, watched from the bench as it fell apart, and somehow walked away from that defeat more valuable than when he walked onto the pitch. Think about how strange that sentence actually is. His team lost. His country's most historic World Cup campaign in decades ended in the cruelest possible way, in their own stadium, in front of their own fans. And none of it touched him. If anything, it proved something the good knights couldn't. So the question worth asking isn't, was Gilberto Mora good at this World Cup? Everyone already knows the answer to that. The real question is why losing didn't cost him anything at all. And to answer that, you have to go back to the beginning. Because the truth is, this isn't a story about one tournament. It's a story about a kid who has been breaking things that shouldn't be breakable since he was 14 years old. Born in Tuxtla Gutierrez in 2008, Mora grew up thousands of kilometers from his native Chiapas, developing in the north of Mexico with Tijuana's academy. At 14, he was already training with the club's under-19 side. That alone isn't remarkable. Plenty of talented 14-year-olds train up an age group or two. What happened next is where it stops being normal. At just 15 years and 10 days old, Mora made his first team debut for Tijuana, becoming the third youngest debutant in Liga MX history. That should have been the headline for the week. Instead, a few minutes into that same debut, he produced an assist and became the youngest assist maker in the history of the competition. 2 records, 1 match, before he was even old enough to drive. He wore the number 251 that day, the kind of number that usually gets buried in an academy roster and never mentioned again. Instead, it started to feel like a serial number, like this kid had been manufactured somewhere ahead of schedule, and nobody had told the rest of Mexican football yet. By 2024, he was playing serious first-team minutes for Tijuana, not cameo appearances, actual regular minutes, at an age when most players his age are still fighting for a place in a reserve side, and the numbers kept escalating from there. Youngest goal scorer in the history of the tournament, a starting role in a Gold Cup semi-final, a decisive contribution to reach the final. And then came the moment that should have told everyone paying attention exactly what they were dealing with. Against Honduras, with Mexico needing a goal in a Gold Cup semi-final, Mora received the ball in midfield, scanned the space, identified a gap most senior professionals wouldn't have seen, and slid a pass into Raul Jimenez that finished the move. It wasn't the strength of the pass that mattered. It was the fact that a 16-year-old had already processed the entire picture of the pitch before defenders twice his age had even registered the danger. Mexico won that tournament, and in doing it, at 16 years and 265 days old, Gilberto Mora became the youngest footballer in history to lift an international title with Mexico. Here's the part that should worry every scout who thought they'd seen enough. He wasn't done accelerating. At the 2025 Under-20 World Cup, Mora was, by most reasonable measures, 2 years younger than large portions of the players lining up against him. Against Brazil, he rescued Mexico late with an assist in the 85th minute. Against Spain, he did something even more absurd, twice. First, a composed finish inside the box, like the pressure simply didn't register. Then, in the 85th minute again, a perfectly struck volley to rescue another equalizer. 2 rescues, same minute mark, different matches. That's not talent showing up occasionally. That's a nervous system that doesn't panic on schedule with everyone else's. By the time he arrived at the Senior World Cup on home soil in 2026, the pattern was already established. Everybody who had actually been watching knew what was coming. The rest of the football world was about to find out in real time. And this is where the story usually turns into the version you've already heard. The perfect group stage. 9 points from 9. 0 goals conceded. Mora pulling strings against Czechia, receiving with his back to goal and turning before defenders could react, playing the pass that started Mexico's second goal in that match, forcing opponents into double and triple marking because his decision-making had become too dangerous to leave unattended. But that version of the story ends at the group stage. This one doesn't. Because the real test, the one that actually tells you whether a 17-year-old belongs on this stage, wasn't going to come against Czechia or South Africa. It was going to come in the round of 16 against England, with Mexico's entire tournament on the line. Mexico walked into that match having done something no host nation had managed since Italy in 1990, a completely spotless group stage. This was supposed to be the night the 40-year wait finally broke. Mexico hadn't won a World Cup knockout match in 4 decades, and here they were at the Azteca with the perfect record, the Golden Kid, and history within reach. 19 minutes in, before England had managed to find their footing, Mora already had a shot on goal. Think about what that actually tells you. The score was still 0-0. The stakes were as high as they get in football, and a 17-year-old's first instinct wasn't to hide. It was to shoot. Then it started to unravel. Jude Bellingham scored twice in the space of 98 seconds in the first half, and suddenly Mexico's perfect story had a crack running straight through it. Julian Quiñones pulled one back to keep hope alive. Then England's Jarell Quansah was sent off early in the second half, and for a moment, just a moment, the entire complexion of the match flipped. Mexico had the extra man. Mexico had the crowd. Mexico had 40 years of hurt screaming at them from every corner of that stadium to finally finish the job. And this is where the story does something cruel. In the 61st minute, with Mexico still chasing the game, Javier Aguirre made a double substitution. Off came Luis Romo. Off came Gilberto Mora. The kid who had spent this entire tournament being the answer to every problem Mexico had was now watching from the touchline as his teammates tried to save the tournament without him. Minutes later, Harry Kane converted a penalty to put England back in control, 3-1. Raúl Jiménez pulled one back from the spot to make it 3-2 and set up a genuinely dramatic finish. Mexico threw everything they had at England in stoppage time. It wasn't enough. England held on. Mexico suffered their first ever home defeat at a World Cup. Not just in this tournament, in the entire history of Mexico hosting the competition. Read that again. Their first ever home loss at a World Cup happened on this specific night, in this specific stadium, with their best young player forced to watch the collapse from a bench, powerless to stop it. If you were building a script for how to bury a 17-year-old's breakout tournament, you couldn't design a worse ending than that. A collapse he had no hand in. A result decided in the minutes after he'd already been withdrawn. A nation's grief landing on a team that no longer included him on the pitch. And yet, and this is the part that should genuinely unsettle every club chasing him, none of it touched his value. If anything, it clarified it. Here's the uncomfortable truth about how football actually works. Tournaments are auditions, not just competitions. Nobody remembers Russia 2018 for France's overall campaign quality. They remember Kylian Mbappé sprinting past Argentina's entire defense at 19 years old and becoming the first teenager to score in a final since 1958. The teams around those players sometimes lost, sometimes struggled. It didn't matter. The players were never really being measured against their team's result. They were being measured against a simpler question. Could they do things at this level that shouldn't be possible at their age? Mora just answered that question in the worst possible circumstances, and the answer came back the same as always. Yes. He didn't need the match to go Mexico's way for scouts to see what they needed to see. He needed 19 minutes and a shot on goal against one of the tournament's best sides to remind everyone what they were dealing with. He'd already spent 4 matches proving it wasn't a fluke, dismantling Czechia's shape with passes that Mexico's midfield had never produced before, forcing opponents into double marking because leaving him unattended had become too dangerous, receiving the ball with his back to goal in ways that Mexico simply hasn't had a midfielder do in years. That's why Barcelona have already tried to get him into a trial. That's why Real Madrid have been watching with what's been described as serious intention. That's why Manchester City have had scouts circling. None of that interest showed up because Mexico won. It showed up because across 5 World Cup matches, against senior professionals twice his age, a kid who wasn't even alive the last time Mexico hosted this tournament, kept doing things that make no sense for someone his age. And here's the part that should actually terrify the clubs already circling him. He is still not the finished product. His body is still a teenager's body, still filling out, still adapting to the physical demands of senior football. Tactically, he's still playing in a system that isn't fully built around him yet. Mexico used him as an interior, as a number 10, as a wide creator, and he adapted to all of it without ever looking like he needed the system to protect him. Mentally, though, we already have the answer to that question. Mentally, he's already there. You don't get a shot on goal in the 19th minute of a World Cup knockout match against England if the occasion is too big for you. You don't force a defense into triple marking you at 17 if you're intimidated by the stage. And you don't walk off a pitch in the 61st minute of the biggest match of your life, watch your team collapse without you, and come out of it more valuable to the biggest clubs in the world, unless what you'd already shown them was real. Mexico's World Cup is over. 40 years of hurt just became 40 plus. And that pain is real. Ask anyone inside that stadium who watched their team throw away a man advantage and a golden opportunity in the space of 20 minutes. That grief belongs to an entire country, and it shouldn't be minimized. But it was never really Gilberto Mora's grief to carry alone, because his story was never actually tied to Mexico's result. It only looked that way from the outside. What actually mattered, what always mattered, was a much simpler test. Put a 17-year-old on the biggest stage the sport has, against opposition that has beaten grown men for a living, and see if he blinks. He didn't blink against South Africa. He didn't blink against Czechia, and with his country's entire tournament balanced on a knife's edge against England, in the 19th minute of the biggest match of his career, he still pulled the trigger. Mexico's World Cup ended on a Sunday night at the Azteca in the cruelest way it could have ended. But Gilberto Mora's story didn't end with it. It just got interrupted, mid-sentence, on a bench, with a lifetime still left to finish it. And every club that's already circling him knows exactly what happens next.